6 months ago, when I began my One Piece journey, there were 2 arcs that everyone warned me about, Enies Lobby and Marineford. I was bombarded with comments that no matter how much I tried, nothing could ever prepare me for what was to come during this section of the story. Well, congratulations, you were all right. This arc completely broke me down, ripped me up, and spat me back out as a new, emotionally crumpled man. Marineford was by far the most entertaining arc of One Piece to watch unfold. It was filled with the most amount of characters clashing, insanely hype moments that I've been dying to see for hundreds of episodes, and it pushed the boundaries of emotional depth in this show to entirely new levels. Luffy is faced with the toughest moment he's had to endure yet, and the future of the One Piece world now remains a complete mystery. So, with all of that said, let's get into the most insane section of Oda's story yet, the Summit War at Marineford. In this review, I'm gonna go over all the major moments from this absolutely insane arc, breaking down everything I was thinking and feeling while watching. I had originally planned to cover both Marineford and post-war in this review, but as I started editing the video, it was getting so long that in order to refrain myself from cutting any commentary I want to make, just for the sake of time, it made sense to just split them into 2 videos. So the post-war video will be out sometime next week with lots of retrospective takes looking back at what unfolded during Marineford. And real quick, I really appreciate everyone showing so much love on these videos. Not only is this kind of review content something I've been wanting to try for years, but getting support on it like this is so amazing, and I owe it all to you guys and One Piece for being so incredible. So if at any point you're enjoying the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing, as it helps the video out a ton, and we're inching closer to 50k subs, which is also insane. Now, for Marineford, where do I even begin with this arc? In my head, the best way I could describe this arc's basic plot was like watching Avengers Endgame when everyone comes through the portals. We had Marines, Admirals, Warlords, Emperors, Revolutionaries, Baroque Works members, all coming together for a war in Navy HQ. Like, that is insane. Getting to know most of these characters and their stories over our 500 plus episode journey to now seeing it all culminate in one place is really what makes the One Piece is too long argument feel very irrelevant, as this arc wouldn't have nearly the impact it does without so much previous lore building. But with this brief consensus of the arc laid out, let's get into the full story of the Summit War. After losing Bonchan and escaping Impel Down, Oda didn't wait for even a single second to continue building up the tension that was coming. Luffy's still separated from his entire crew, Ace is going to be executed in 3 hours, and the government's going to clash with the Whitebeard pirates. So many thoughts were running through my mind at this point. What is a Whitebeard versus world government war going to look like if it happens? And how powerful really is Whitebeard? Are they really going to execute Ace, or is this just sort of a tactic for the government to use? And how in the world is Luffy going to even reach Ace if he does make it to Marineford? With all of these questions, the arc begins. It starts off by showing all these places around the world of people being afraid of what's to come with this war. The news of Ace being executed is a huge deal, as people are scared of Whitebeard arriving and the damage the war will cause if he does. And more importantly for them, they're terrified of a world where pirates are running everything. The world building here was actually really good in my opinion, as it really helped put into perspective how the rest of the world feels about pirates in this moment. In my watch, I think I tend to get caught up with how great the Straw Hats are and how every place they go to is left better than it was before, but that's not really the case with a lot of these other pirate crews. Most civilians are fully on the side of the government and Marines to protect them, and in a lot of cases, they actually do. However, as we learn through the encounters we've had with them, there's massive amounts of corruption and harmful sides to the government that goes completely swept under the rug to the rest of the world. Which is why this scene felt so strange, seeing people root against someone like Whitebeard, but of course, it really boils down to how the government has painted the picture of pirates to all of them, and shows us that their propaganda really does work. But regardless of either side, with how worried people were and how much tension was being built, you could tell this war was about to be something massive. While traveling towards Marineford, the Navy calls the ship that Luffy and everyone is on. They confirm they're aware of who's all on the ship, and they won't be able to get into Marine HQ without the Gates of Justice opening, which was yet another hurdle for them to cross. However, that doesn't faze Luffy, as he says he's gonna save Ace no matter what. He tells them he wants their potatoes on a platter instead of heads on a platter. And I just love this Luffy bit of him mixing up words and phrases like he did with Genzo. It's also mentioned how Buggy was part of Roger's crew with Shanks, and the Marines are straight up hyping him up like he's Dark Knight Joker or something. This really starts to build the cult-like following the prisoners end up having for Buggy, which was such a funny side story that I loved during this whole arc. When all the setup is done, we finally find ourselves at Navy HQ, Marineford. And the setting of this place was so cool. I thought the shape and format of the headquarters looked so awesome, and I really loved how much of its design was actually used in the war. From things like the water below being frozen to becoming the battlefield, the walls going up later, or just the way it's a visual crescent to show them getting surrounded later on when the pacifistas arrive. It was all just a very cool design for a war to take place in my opinion. The story begins to unfold in Marineford as we start to get a look at everything that's happening there. The sheer amount of people and characters that were present during this war was kind of mind-blowing. We're shown that the army has over 100,000 men at the ready, all 3 of the admirals, vice admirals, fleet admirals, and 5 out of the 7 warlords all ready to fight Whitebeard if he arrives. And knowing later on that a Straw Hat, the 2 final warlords, a previous warlord, a revolutionary, 2 emperors of the sea, and a rookie would all be joining in on the chaos is what makes this arc by far the most entertaining to watch in my eyes. Like I mentioned earlier, during this whole setup, I kept making comparisons to what it felt like watching Avengers Endgame's final war scene. That scene felt so impactful because it was 10 plus years of characters, storyline, and world building all finally coming together, and this really felt no different. With the war being set, it's also shown that the government plans to broadcast Ace's execution to the people and reporters on Sabaody, all tuning in to share the news with the rest of the world, which will become an important detail later. As everyone from Sabaody tunes in, Ace is finally brought out in handcuffs to the execution platform. Watching as Ace is brought out and it constantly cuts back and forth to flashbacks of him and Luffy as kids, standing on the edge of the water talking about their future, at the time had me both worried and kind of excited. I was excited because Oda was giving us reminders of just how much Ace means to Luffy and how much he's willing to risk to save him, making me hyped to see how Luffy was actually going to save Ace. However, it was worrying me because I'm well aware by this point with Oda's writing, when I see a backstory coming, it usually means tears are to follow, and little did I know what was actually coming my way. As Ace, Sengoku, and Garp are in front of the entire world, we get the most insane reveal of this show yet, that Ace is actually the son of Gol Roger. What? I could not believe my ears when I heard this. We find out that Roger had a kid with a woman named Portgas de Rouge who lived in the South Blue. When word got around that Roger might be having a kid on the way, the government took full measures by searching all of the newborns on islands Roger had previously visited, as well as any pregnant women for the next 9 months. However, Ace's mother performed a miracle and was able to hold off giving birth for 20 months in order to keep Ace's birth under the radar, ultimately though, costing her life in the process. The conversation Garp and Ace had during Impel Down becomes much more clear. First of all, I'm not gonna lie, Oda got my ass completely. During that conversation, he wrote specific phrasing that could be used for both Dragon and Roger, like Ace saying he has the blood of a heinous criminal inside of him, which is exactly how they describe Dragon currently in the show. I even wrote in my notes that I take when watching the show that Ace and Luffy could have had a different parent and be stepbrothers, but I literally went ahead and dismissed that theory after hearing this conversation. So props to you, Oda, I took the bait. When you first start the show, it feels like a common thought that Luffy would be directly related to Roger, but it never even crossed my mind that it could be Ace, and I think Luffy being the red herring there was a really clever way to mask that. One point about this that I think is insane is the fact that Luffy just knew about this the whole time. Like what? The casual reveal that he knew about this to Eva was so funny, but also a very what the hell moment. Seriously kind of mind-blowing. First Garp being his grandpa, and now this. I'm really starting to wonder if Luffy knows more secrets that he hasn't informed his crew, or us, about. This moment is kind of funny though, because of course it's a massive deal that Ace is the son of the king of the pirates, but the reason Luffy never shared it is not because he was looking out for Ace, but as we later find out, it's just because Ace didn't like when he talked about it. Just such a Luffy way to go about this whole thing. And secondly, during that prison conversation, Ace says he owes so much to his mother and is why he took the name Portgas, which now makes a whole lot more sense, as she literally sacrificed herself for Ace to even have a chance at living, which is just brutal knowing how this arc ends. The reveal of all this shocking information was so incredible. During the flashback scene of Roger in jail telling Garp he has a kid on the way, the music here was on an entirely different level. It was like a Roman Catholic church choir song you hear at the pearly gates of justice or something. Like I've said in all my other videos, the music in this show is a massive part for me, and this scene specifically stuck into my brain so hard because of it. Included in that, the entire section with Garp visiting Ace's mother in the South Blue and her moments with her unborn child. Ugh, I can't get over how good this whole section was. The visuals, the music, the importance to the story, so good. Lastly, I think a major part here is why Garp became the guardian of Ace. When Roger tells Garp to protect his innocent child, he's confused of course, but Roger says to him that they've tried to kill kill each other so many times, he trusts Garp as much as he trusts anyone on his crew. To me, this felt like Roger's way of saying that he has a lot of respect for Garp. Although they're enemies, he knows Garp is a good man with good intentions and is why he's the perfect person to tell this information to, since he's not someone who's going to let an innocent child take the fall for his father's actions. The way this was a notable pirate interacting with a lifelong military foe reminded me a lot of what I think Luffy and Kobe's dynamic will be in the future. They know both of them are good people, but due to their roles, there's always going to be some sort of divide between them. Of course, I don't know how Kobe's story will play out, but as of now, I could see this kind of dynamic forming later. Watching the scene of Ace being dragged out onto the platform is really just so heartbreaking. His whole life, Ace was made to feel bad about his very existence being Roger's son, building a hard defense around him because of it. And now, he's being punished by the world government for something he has no control over. This situation is putting all the people he ended up letting into his life and loving over the years, like the Whitebeard pirates and Luffy, in danger because they care for him so much. But he couldn't see that same love for himself, so in this moment, he can't help but feel extremely guilty. But keeping in mind the guilt that he felt here, it makes for a very special moment that we'll get to later. We're given a lot of conflicting information about why Whitebeard actually ended up bringing Ace onto his crew here, as it said him and the government realized who Ace was around the same time, just that Whitebeard got to him first. Sengoku says Whitebeard brought him on because he was the son of his enemy and wanted to make Ace the next king of the pirates, but Ace, however, completely denies this information and says he always intended to help Whitebeard become the king. With all the context and conflicting points laid out, the two main storylines for the Summit War begin. First, Luffy and the crew approach the Gates of Justice, wondering how they're gonna get inside because it can only be opened from the inside of Marineford. But then, it opens. This was pretty insane and also hilarious how Buggy and his dedicated prisoner followers instantly began praising him for it, but I had so many questions running through my head of how it just opened. My main thoughts were either Kobe or Boa, or Garp had told them to do it. And secondly, Whitebeard and all his allies finally arrived to Marineford. We first see 43 ally ships emerge from the fog, featuring some characters from the New World with really awesome designs, like this guy with a monkey on his shoulder, Bohemian Knight Doma, and the Ice Witch Whitey Bay, whose design I loved. However, with all these ships piling up to the shore, there was no sign of the Moby Dick. But that's when some bubbles start forming in the middle of the Crescent dock, and all of a sudden, Whitebeard's ship coated in the Sabaody bubble resin emerges from the water dead center in front of everyone. The man himself aura farms up some stairs and we're met with just the coolest shot of Whitebeard overlooking all of Marineford in front of Ace. Not only was Whitebeard cool, but so was his whole crew. Throughout this review, I'll mention a few of the notable characters like Marco and Vista. However, I love the design of some of the others like Izo and especially Haruta. Whitebeard says very few words before getting to work on saving Ace. And let me just say here, his laugh caught me so off guard. This show has a pretty iconic track record of characters with insane laughs, and Whitebeard's is definitely up there. It sounded like someone trying to start up their 1996 Honda Civic that they found on Facebook Marketplace. Whitebeard and Ace exchange some looks when we finally get a flashback to how Ace came to join his crew. This flashback gave us a ton of information about Ace between when he left his hometown to meeting him in Alabasta. We saw that he created his own crew of pirates called the Spade Pirates, which is a sick name and design for a crew with his name being Ace. I low-key kinda wish he kept that crew because it was so fire. And we learned early on, Ace wanted to become king of the pirates himself, making it his main goal to take out the strongest pirate around, Whitebeard. We see a scene where Ace meets with Shanks, which was a big question I had, wondering if the two had ever met or interacted. In this interaction, it's clear it's the first time they'd ever met, since Shanks starts off a little bit hostile until he learns that Ace was Luffy's brother, to which the mood completely changes. How happy they both were to talk about Luffy was so sweet, and Ace wanted to come thank Shanks for being such a great guy to Luffy growing up. I'm really happy this interaction happened and that we got to actually see it and not just be something said in passing. It was brief, but it was just a bucket list item for me to pray happened in the show. During this flashback, it's also shown that Ace had previously met Jinbei, meaning their interaction together in Impel Down was not their first. Jinbei, who was already a warlord at the time, ends up fighting Ace for 5 days straight, since Ace's goal was to take down Whitebeard, which, as we know from their conversations in prison, Whitebeard helps protect many places from government oppression like Fishman Island. And finally, we see the moment when Whitebeard shows up and offers Ace to join his crew and be a son of his. Ace refuses at first and tries to fight Whitebeard, which doesn't work out too well, as he ends up being loosely captured onto his ship. During his time there, there, Ace tries to kill Whitebeard multiple times, but of course, it's no use. Even members of the crew like Thatch, who's the man Blackbeard killed, tells Ace it's useless to try and overpower the captain at his current state, so his options are to leave or consider joining. As conflicted as he is, he ends up joining when he hears why the crew calls him Pops. There's even a moment when Ace asks Blackbeard, who was already obsessed with his cherry pies at the time, if it's okay he becomes a commander before Blackbeard since he's newer, to which Blackbeard says he doesn't mind at all, as we know all along his plan was to find the dark fruit and dip anyway. There comes a moment when Ace finally has a deep conversation with Whitebeard and asks him why he wants the son of his enemy to be part of his crew. And this was the moment that really got through to Ace. Whitebeard states whoever your parents are is useless information, as everyone is a child of the sea, essentially framing that you can choose your family out on the waters. And these were the exact words that Ace needed to hear, coming from someone as strong and notable as Whitebeard. All his life, Ace had put up that hard shell and lived with fear of people finding out his real heritage, but with Whitebeard, everyone has a clean slate. You are who you are, and the past you can't control doesn't define you. And in hearing this conversation, it reminded me a lot of that Fisher Tiger guy story who created the Sun Pirates, as a big part of his message was putting former slaves and crew members on the same level with no type of inherited bias. And so it really feels like a lot of the older generation of pirates held on to the rulebook of pirating and what it really means, which is why I think people like Whitebeard are so interested in making sure the next generation of pirates are the ones that live up to that same code, which we'll later see in the arc. When Ace finds out that Blackbeard killed Thatch, no matter how hard Whitebeard and the rest of the crew try to tell him to let it go this one time because they have a weird feeling, Ace couldn't let someone do that to a member of his family, and he sets off, which leads us to this predicament today. With the information that Ace is Roger's son, the tone of the entire situation somehow became even more serious, as now the stakes of Ace's execution have reached entirely new levels. There's a very bittersweet moment here when Whitebeard and his crew lie to Ace about him leaving to find Blackbeard that day, as you can just tell Ace feels so guilty for all these people having to go to war for him. It was another moment where I gained a lot of respect for Whitebeard, watching him take the blame for Ace leaving to try and keep his mental up at his lowest point, and inform him that they came here by choice, not because they had to. Whitebeard confidently looks at Ace, tells him this will only take a second, and then for the first time on screen, activates his devil fruit ability, the Tremor Fruit. And holy, this animation was so sick. Whitebeard cracks the freaking sky and everything begins to tremble as tidal waves emerge and tectonic plates shift all around the headquarters, which is when the Summit War of Marineford officially kicks off. Now there is so much that happens during this arc, and I'm gonna try to just highlight the big moments as the war progresses on and include some of my favorite parts, but there's a very good chance I miss a thing or two somewhere just because there's so much. First, as the tidal wave starts closing in, we get our first Admiral encounter as Iceman Aokiji flies into the air and uses his Ice Age ability to freeze all the water around the base. He tries to attack Whitebeard, which swiftly does not work, as he falls into the water below, freezing that as well, and sets up the battlefield for this war. With the floor now frozen, Whitebeard commanders and allied pirates both begin pouring into the battle as the Navy brings out their vice admirals and 5 warlords, which is when we get our first warlord encounter during this arc with Mihawk. Mihawk takes the first warlord swing when he tries to send a crazy looking green slash attack directly at Whitebeard, which I was already getting so hyped to see all these powerful characters starting to interact in combat. Like 3 episodes into the war, we had already seen the world's greatest swordsman versus the world's strongest man. However, I'm not gonna lie, Mihawk got kinda mogged by this guy, Diamond Jozu, the 3rd Whitebeard division commander, as he just straight up deflects the attack. You hate to see it. Then, a second admiral joins the fight as Kizaru, who I like to call Adam Zappler now, goes for a quick attack on Whitebeard, but also gets mogged by, in my opinion, the second coolest Whitebeard pirate behind Ace, the 1st Division Commander, Marco the Phoenix. Marco stops Kizaru's attack mid-air in his blue flame phoenix devil fruit form, which we learn is a special type called a mythical Zoan type. To my knowledge, this is the first time we're hearing of something like this, so it had me wondering, is this like a rare kind of devil fruit to find? AKA, is he basically like a shiny Pokemon? Have we met someone else with this kind of mythical devil fruit powers before? Not sure. After Mihawk and Kizaru's attacks were stopped, Jozu takes the first offensive attack from their side and picks up a massive piece of ice, flinging it towards the Marines. This dude is low-key a beast. But this is when we finally meet the 3rd and final Navy Admiral, Akainu. Except we've actually already seen him before during Robin's backstory, when we find out he's the one who made the call to shoot down the ship of Ohara civilians. And now knowing how this arc ends, I need him gone, erased, split in half. A Mortal Kombat joint snapping, back breaking, neck twisting sorry. Akainu shows us he's a lava man as he punches the giant ice block flying their way with ease. So now we know the 3 admirals are Lava, Ice, and Light, which is basically just the 3 Pokemon Go teams. Whitebeard stops Akainu's attack and hits him with the hardest bar ever when he tells him to go light some birthday candles as the war around them rages on. Then, out of freaking nowhere, a massive giant pulls up who just so happens to be the descendant of Oars, Little Oars Jr. This was crazy, bro. Since when did Whitebeard have a mini Oars on his squad? Regardless, Little Oars Jr. pulls up and starts putting in work by smashing some stuff and telling the Navy to stop because Ace is a nice guy. I'm liking this Little Oars Jr. guy. Some of the Navy giants try stopping Oars Jr. as he makes his way towards Ace, but they all get slapped down pretty easily. However, Oars Jr. is eventually halted when some of the other warlords join in to stop him. Kuma hits Oars with his paw print bubble attack that we saw him use during Thriller Bark, which slows down Oars Jr. a good amount, but then what really puts the nail in the coffin is when Doflamingo flies in and slices his damn foot off. This was crazy. We still have yet to see much of Doflamingo besides the brief scene of him taking out Bellamy and company, and based on everything we've seen now, I think I can confidently say that this dude is a straight up psychopath. The whole time he's about to attack Oars Jr., he's just flying around giggling to himself, and then once he slices the foot off, he just smiles and says how much fun he's having. I'm still a bit unsure of what his ability is at the moment, since beforehand we saw that he can manipulate people into doing actions that he wants them to do, but now he just made a foot get severed off pretty easily. Oars Jr. didn't have a sword or anything on him to cut his own leg, so if he did manipulate Oars to do that to himself, I don't get how, unless I just somehow completely missed that. I also don't know when we'll eventually get to see Doflamingo become a main part of the story, or if he ever will be, but if so, I'm kind of excited for it because this dude is an actual freak. As Oars is falling to the floor after taking a beating, we're hit with a flashback of all the good times Ace and Oars Jr. had together over the years, just amplifying the emotions this whole sequence has. It shows a moment when Ace made Oars Jr. a big straw hat to block the weather from his face, whether it be the sun, rain, or snow, and Oars Jr. just absolutely loved it, and you could just tell how much Ace and this meant to him. So cutting back and forth between this flashback and Oars Jr. tanking so much damage just to try and help Ace in any way he can was so heartbreaking to watch. We only knew Oars Jr. and Ace even had a relationship at all for like 10 minutes at this point, but the way in which Oda can write so much emotion between characters in such a short amount of time is really impressive. As Ace is watching in horror as his big buddy does everything in his power to help him, Moria decides to finally jump in and puts the final nail in the coffin as he uses a bunch of shadows to strike Oars Jr., sending him crashing down onto a wall between the battlefield and Ace. While Oars Jr. didn't make it all the way to Ace, his body crushing the wall left an opening for Whitebeard's men to cross into the next section closer, and this wouldn't be the last time that Oars Jr.'s efforts came in clutch either. During all this chaos, Kobe and Helmeppo are shaking in their boots and they sneak off to keep away from the battle, but they spot Akainu nearby scolding a fellow Marine who had done the same thing as them. And let's just say this Marine doesn't make it. Horrified, Kobe and Helmeppo can't believe what they just witnessed, seeing a Navy admiral murder one of their own men, and will really start to dig into Kobe more as the war rages on. Akainu radios into the rest of the military to activate their secret plan, the first big tactical move by the Navy, to move up Ace's execution, and immediately the tension was now built even higher. Garp ends up coming to sit next to Ace and again gives us a bit more insight into just how conflicted he truly is in this moment. He says he feels no sympathy for criminals since that's the life they chose, but when it comes to family, it's a very different story. He emotionally asks why him and Luffy couldn't have just followed his wishes of becoming Marines so none of them would be in this situation, as he starts breaking down in tears wondering what he should do. As the viewer, you're just sitting here like, just free Ace, bro, but in reality, it's really not that easy, especially with Sengoku standing right next to them. I have a feeling a lot of people have very conflicting opinions of Garp in this series from moments like this, where he could have just fought to save Ace or some of the other moments later, but I'll get much more into that during the post-war review. With the two of them sitting here, it cuts to some flashbacks of Ace and Luffy as kids, which started to get me really emotional. While it's clear that Garp was a very close-minded, stubborn old man wanting the two of his boys to become Marines, Ace was the same way about becoming a pirate, which of course only further influenced Luffy's decision too. So although their goals in life were much different and them being literal kids, it was clear that Garp did really love his boys. Now, with emotions high between Garp and Ace, all of the Whitebeard pirates and allies being killed in the war zone down below, and the tension at an all-time high with the word that Ace is about to be executed ahead of schedule, we reach my favorite part of this entire arc. In the middle of the most high-intense, era-defining war, a dark shadow can be seen from the clouds above, and all of a sudden, we see glimpses of a few characters fly past our screen when we hear some screaming. happening. And that's when you realize who's falling out of the damn sky. Luffy and the impelled down crew. Man, when I tell you I was bawling my eyes out during this scene, I am not exaggerating. If you've seen my other videos, I often mention that the times that get me to cry the hardest in this show for some reason are moments when Luffy's able to showcase the lengths he'll go for the people he cares about in his life. Like in Water 7 when he gains the strength to break 2 buildings apart after hearing that Robin was taken away, or during his fight with Lucci when he refuses to fall over after taking an absolute beating. It's moments where you probably are supposed to be hyped and cheering that Luffy is this strong character doing something awesome, but I'm always overcome with so much emotion and just start crying when these moments happen, and this was no different. We see Crocodile, Jinbei, Buggy, Mr. 1, Mr. 3, and Luffy appear out of thin air, yelling as they're falling from the sky above. I mean this in all glaze possible. This was probably one of the most hype ways ever that Luffy could have entered this battle. The entire time this war was happening, in the back of my mind I was wondering when this crew would arrive, but more importantly, how the hell they would even be able to get close if they did. And with no given context yet, them just appearing out of the sky with an upside down Navy ship falling behind them was just so perfect. I'm not gonna lie too, when I first saw the shadow, I thought this was the Arc Maxim and Eneru was about to show up and just start zapping people. It kinda does look like it, right? As Luffy's falling, he screams to Ace, and this is where my tears really started to come out. Since Sabaody, Luffy has lost his entire crew and has no idea if he'll ever get them back. He was sent to a remote, women-only island and somehow convinced their government-hating princess to sneak him onto a Navy ship, broke into the world's most heavily guarded prison, and made it through 6 floors of hell and back, forming a Suicide Squad crew to help him break out, and now has made it through the gates of justice twice to reach Marineford to have even a chance at saving his brother. So the moment Ace and Luffy finally see each other as Luffy's falling from the sky with the most insane group of characters, knowing everything he had been through to reach this point, yeah, I was bawling my eyes out, man. There's years of conflict between all these mature, older characters fighting for literal world-altering consequences. Garp is having a heavy heart-to-heart with Ace, time is running out for his execution being moved up, and all of a sudden this relentless kid who's just become a pain in the ass for the government to deal with somehow does it again as he just appears out of thin air to mess up their plans. And this can all be summed up in one scene.
Garp! また貴様の家族だぞ!
It's just so peak. I love the way Oda writes these moments to perfectly capture what makes Luffy such an amazing character. We find out the reason they fell is because a wave they were on turned to ice during Aokiji's freeze attack, and once they heard about Ace's execution being moved up, made a hasty attempt at freeing their boat, which didn't work out too well. With this unlikely group of characters crash landing onto Loot Lake, they waste no time getting straight to business. Jinbei officially puts in his warlord resignation as Crocodile immediately heads towards Whitebeard to take him out, only to be stopped by Mugiwara Boy in second gear. This was a really cool throwback moment when it shows that Luffy was already covered in water to counter Crocodile's attacks like he learned in Alabasta. Although the two had worked together to escape during Impel Down, Crocodile had his goal in mind to take out Whitebeard. However, Luffy knows how much Ace likes him and he stops him. Later on we see Crocodile try to attack him again, but he's stopped easily by Jozu, who kinda seems like the GOAT at this point. He's now single-handedly stopped both Mihawk and Crocodile in their tracks. Luffy and Whitebeard then have their first interaction together, and it quickly becomes clear to Whitebeard what kind of person Luffy is when Luffy yells in his face that he's actually going to be the king of the pirates, shocking everyone around them. In this moment though, you could tell Whitebeard gained some admiration for Luffy almost instantly. It also reaffirmed the times Ace told him all about his little brother gaining notoriety with bounties, and when Shanks told him that he lost his arm making a bet on the next generation. Luffy tells Whitebeard about Ace's execution being moved up, and the two begin their separate plans for how they're going to save Ace, which now brings us to the part of the arc where Luffy must cross the battlefield. As a review of this arc, I want to mention the entire upcoming section was one of the two very small criticisms I had while watching. Throughout this whole next section of Luffy running to reach Ace, many times it felt like he would make some progress over an episode or two, and then once it showed another wide angle shot, he had only moved like 5 feet. While yes, there were hurdles and enemies in the way, it was just something I noticed a few times while watching. I've also heard that this is yet again just a pacing issue on Toei's end and not a problem in the actual manga, which if that's true, fair enough, I'm happy it's not a writing issue, and if that is the case, then just take this criticism as a viewing experience one and not from a story perspective. And yes, before you type that comment, I have heard of One Piece, but I'm watching everything, so no worries, just a small criticism. With that said, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. This part was chock full of peak moments. Luffy begins fighting through hordes of enemies, including some familiar faces. We see Full Body, who's the Marine Sanji bitched in Baratie, Django, the hypnotist in Kuro's crew in Syrup Village, Hina, the Navy Rear Admiral we met very briefly in Alabasta, Kuma, who's shooting laser beams at him and broke his word that they'd never meet again, and Moria, who's sending the zombies of dead Marines and pirates on the floor after Luffy, which is kind of fucked up. Not gonna lie, when I saw Moria here, I did think he was gonna use an ability like this, taking all the dead Marines and using them as zombies, and the fact that Oda actually used that concept, I really would have expected Moria to be much more of a threat, but he kind of wasn't. To be fair though, we do see Jinbei completely counter him by shooting salt water from the sea under them at all his zombies, so I guess he did get easily countered, and then Jinbei showed up and whooped his ass. Luffy goes second gear to avoid some attacks and third gear to punch his way through, but as he's fighting his way forward, Ace shouts to him to try and put his wall up again. He gets angry at Luffy for showing up to help when this is all Ace's fault. But just like Whitebeard did earlier, Luffy ignores this attempt at Ace playing brave and just reassures Ace that he's there by choice. And as many times as Ace says a little brother shouldn't be saving their big brother, Luffy doesn't care at all and he'd die if it meant saving Ace. Sengoku also sees this happen and makes a decision to start broadcasting to the entire battlefield and all the reporters on Sabaody that Luffy is in fact the son of Dragon, which just makes the whole place boom. Whitebeard hears this exchange and he puts a smile on his face and commands the rest of his crew to help protect Luffy during the war. The reporters on Sabaody rush to get the big news out, all the warlords and other characters are shocked, and Smoker, who's also on the battlefield at this moment, now realizes why Dragon saved Luffy that day back in Loketown. Smoker immediately darts for Luffy and the two have a pretty sick aerial battle, with Luffy using second gear and Smoker flying around using his Smoke Devil Fruit power. Smoker is able to pin Luffy down, showcasing how much stronger he's gotten since they last met. However, it's broken up when Hammock decides to make an appearance in the battle. Boa had showed some of her combat moves a bit earlier against Marines and pirates. Since she doesn't give a damn which side you're on, if you're a man, you suck. Except for one. She saves Luffy and comes in clutch once again, handing him a key for Ace's handcuffs. Say what you want about Boa, but the amount of things she's done for Luffy to get to this point is kind of astonishing. Luffy hugs Boa, who then falls to her knees, and the commentary from the Marines watching this encounter was so funny as they think Luffy just defeated yet another warlord of the sea. Eva and Luffy run into Kuma next, which is a scene filled with so much lore building questions relating to Kuma that I was kind of blown away. We're told that Eva and Kuma are actually close friends and that Eva's confused why Kuma's fighting back because he absolutely hates the government. That doesn't make any sense. He's literally the government's weapon. How can he hate the government? To which Doflamingo jumps in and fills them in by stating that the once named Tyrant Kuma is no longer living. He claims Kuma volunteered to be the government's human weapon test, and as of a few days ago, Dr. Vegapunk finished the final modifications to Kuma's body, completely erasing his memories. This ends up making what Kuma said to Luffy on Sabaody about them being the last time they'd ever interact make much more sense, as Kuma meant this metaphorically about himself. However, the amount of questions I have about Kuma now is through the roof. Why was he called Tyrant Kuma? If Kuma hated the government so much, why would he volunteer to be their human weapon guinea pig? And so did he send the Straw Hats away to get stronger on purpose? During my live tweets of this arc on Twitter, I wrote an entire theory proposition for what I think is loosely happening to Kuma, so I'm gonna lay it all out for you here, as this revelation has made it come full circle in some ways. Kuma, who we now know was a big bad tyrant beforehand, sacrificed himself to the government for some reason. That reason is still unknown, and I'm going to guess it was to save either his family or his crew if he had any, or even potentially the world if it stopped someone more evil from being their guinea pig. I just don't see another reason being that important to do something so drastic as donate your body to people you hate, but this part is still unclear to me. However, it now feels like Kuma is against his decision, and I think he did everything he could before his memories were wiped to lay the stepping stones for Luffy and the Straw Hats to defeat the government, essentially putting all his eggs in the basket of Luffy being the only man brave enough, courageous, and pure of heart enough to stop them. So, when Kuma sent the Straw Hats away on Sabaody, it wasn't just to escape Kizaru and the Celestial Dragon's wrath, it was also to help get this plan in motion. And what he told Rayleigh was probably this whole plan. Now, this is just a theory, a game theory, but with Eva stating just how much Kuma hated the government, I feel like the measures would have to be pretty damn drastic to accept this kind of offer. Unless perhaps he agreed to be a guinea pig, but the government went behind his back doing things to him that he didn't realize were being done once he was already on the operation table or whatever. That actually could be another theory now that I'm thinking about it low-key. Regardless, the motive for Kuma siding with the government is still unknown, and I really don't have a solid theory as to why, but I think his recent actions before the memory wipe are starting to paint a picture. While the Kuma situation is happening, Buggy and Whitebeard have a conversation which is just the funniest encounter ever, and begins the greatest most Buggy side story of all time throughout the arc. Whitebeard remembers Buggy from being on Roger's crew, to which his entire group of cult followers just start praising him for, and this was cracking me up. Whitebeard suggests Buggy team up with him, but secretly does this just so his army of infamous pirate prisoners behind him aren't an issue, and then he gets swept away in Crocodile's sandstorm. Luffy continues towards Ace as he runs into Mihawk for the first time since Baratie, which was another insane encounter. Seeing Luffy fight these characters we met so many episodes back is just so cool, and exactly what I've been waiting for in this show to happen for so long. I imagine those of you who have been with this story since the beginning were dying of excitement during this entire arc. Mihawk shows off some crazy moves as he sends out long-range slashes, jumps far into the air for a strike down, and even cuts a massive line into the ice waves surrounding the arena in the distance. The two are fighting, and it becomes clear to Luffy that too much time is going to be wasted trying to fight Mihawk alone, so he plucks Buggy out of the sandstorm and uses him as a red nose shield. But even with Buggy immune to slash attacks, Mihawk is still too strong, so Vista, the 5th Whitebeard commander and fellow swordsman, steps in to counter Mihawk. As Luffy's running away from Mihawk, we get an awesome scene where Mihawk showcases one of Luffy's greatest strengths, his ability to turn all the people around him into allies without even trying. And this only gets proven more when Kizaru comes in to attack Luffy, but a large group of Whitebeard commanders swoops in to help him get past and reach Ace. And once again, this commander group is just so cool. This is when, somehow, the arc begins to ramp up even more and the stakes become even more real. The guards move into place to execute Ace early, and the people of Sabaody watch the fate of the world play out right in front of their eyes. But then, Sengoku makes the call to cut all the feeds because they need to win at any cost, which, knowing the world government and seeing an admiral literally murder one of their own men just moments before, had me wondering what on earth they could plan to do that they couldn't show the reporters watching. And that's when an entire fleet of Kuma pacifistas come marching from the waters behind Whitebeard and begin blasting pirates and marines alike. So, to answer my question, they were ready to murder half of their own army just to secure a victory royale. However, we get a pretty crazy revelation that the war call over the intercom to push Ace's execution up was actually a tactic they intentionally leaked to draw Whitebeard and his allies in closer, eventually to surround them with this pack of Kumas. But Whitebeard, being the goat he is, had guessed their tactics and made the allied pirates spread across the battlefield to attack the surrounding navy ships, so they had an escape route if an ambush did come. Old man was playing Command and Conquer out here. And then, it was time. The funniest fucking thing that happens in this entire arc. The government has cut all the feeds to Sabaody so they can begin their bloody massacre and sweep it under the rug, except there's one more TV screen still on. There's one feed still being broadcasted, and it's pointed right at a man in a marine coat with blue hair poking out, and that person was Buggy the damn clown. When I say this whole side story was absolutely frying me, it is no joke. This was the funniest thing ever, watching Buggy become the first kick streamer in One Piece and start filming a literal war zone to try to get his own aura up. Buggy and his crew set up an entire plot to boost Buggy's status amongst the reporters in Sabaody, talking about his adventures on Roger's crew and how much work he's putting in during this war. There might have been some hiccups here and there, but surely the people were being inspired by the GOAT. I can't get over the fact that hundreds of dudes are getting murdered all around him, and this dude just booted up a live stream. Now, as silly as this whole part was, it actually played a massive role in the war without Buggy even realizing, as it stopped the government from being able to completely control the narrative. The government is very set on making sure their public image is always in tip-top shape, and so to have a rogue camera feed out in the war zone after they just gave the most corrupt orders ever to kill their own men is a very bad look for them. All of the rookie pirates we met before, like Law, Captain Kidd, and Apu, are still on Sabaody and even echo this same sentiment. Amongst this group, while most of them are just sitting around witnessing the chaos, we also see Jewelry Bonnie on Sabaody watching, but for some reason she's crying. I don't know what she's crying about, and I don't think they specified, but how much bravado she had when we first met her. Seeing her so distraught over a battle felt extremely out of character, so I just noted that down, unless she was perhaps so moved by Buggy the Clown, to which case I totally understand the tears. I too would cry seeing such passion embodied. Back in the war zone, the main allied pirate that Whitebeard attempted to reach when making the call to spread out, Squard, emerges again and the two speak a bit. Whitebeard says he's ready to head towards Ace, but just then, Squard out of nowhere stabs Whitebeard through the chest. This was insane and caught me so off guard. We find out that Squard was tricked into thinking Whitebeard made a deal with the Navy to sacrifice all the allied pirates of the New World in order to not actually have Ace be killed and him become the king of the pirates. While the part about wanting Ace to become the next king was true, the rest of it was not. However, the Navy is extremely smart and they targeted a man who would be hurt the most by this information. Squard's entire former crew were all killed by Roger, so he has a lifelong hatred of him. So over the years, Squard, not knowing that he got close to Ace without knowing he's Roger's son, pissed him off. So in the heat of battle, Squard believed what Akainu told him and took it upon himself to kill Whitebeard to save the rest of the allied pirates. After stabbing him and quote-unquote exposing Whitebeard's plan, he stretches out his arm, fully ready to be squashed like a bug by the hands of Whitebeard, except he's only met with a hug. And this was yet another moment that made me gain so much respect for Whitebeard. You could tell Squard was really hurt by this information, as Whitebeard and his crew had become so important to him over the years, especially after what Roger did to him. So to think the man they all called Pops would betray their trust to make his biggest nemesis' son the king, his anger was honestly kind of justified. However, it wasn't true. So Whitebeard, instead of lashing out at Squard for his mistake, understands the situation and would never hurt one of his sons, especially if the intentions behind their actions were not actually malicious, and tells Squard to think of all the good times he's had with Ace over the years, and despite his hatred for Roger, you should never resent a son for the sins of their father. He then breaks all the ice surrounding the base and tells the allied pirates if they like to escape, they can, proving the Navy was lying. He shouts that if you're a pirate, you can make the decision for yourself on what to believe. Like I said, this whole section was written so well to show us so much of Whitebeard's character. Even in the heat of war and being stabbed, which up until now seemed pretty impossible to even try on him, Whitebeard will always care for the well-being of his sons. Of course, hearing this speech from Whitebeard, all his sons realize the kind of man he is and follow him into war as he finally emerges from the ship onto the battlefield. Whitebeard aura farms as he moves towards Ace, tilting the entire battlefield, sea, and buildings, which all begin to collapse. Seeing this, the Navy began to put up their defenses by raising the unbreakable walls surrounding the dock. However, as the walls begin to go up, there's one section that doesn't, and that's because it's blocked by none other than Little Oars Jr., the absolute legend. After tanking hits from warlords and cannon fire, all the effort Oars Jr. made to make it to the end as far as he could paid off by allowing Whitebeard and his crew to advance off the dock and into the courtyard. However, they had a few more hurdles to cross before doing that. Sengoku and Akainu activate their next step of the plan, Operation Fireball Lava Meteor Shower Cook Them Boys on the battlefield. Akainu showcases more of his power as he floods the air with falling lava meteors to hit the pirates and melt the ice underneath them, forcing them to lose their footing and drowning any devil fruit users in the process. And not only that, the water becomes boiling hot. So now, with massive walls up all around the arena, a group of Kuma robots closing in behind them, and the ice they're standing on being melted by falling lava rocks, it was all starting to feel so hopeless with the Navy being so strategic. And then Akainu blows up the Moby Dick, Whitebeard ship he's had for decades. I'm sick of seeing beloved ships get burned up in this show, man. Stop doing that, Oda. I still have PTSD from the last one. Luffy and the crew try making a run for the opening, but get blasted back by tons of cannon fire as Luffy falls into the water and gets saved by Jinbei for like the third time this arc alone. But that's when Luffy decides he has a plan and he needs Jinbei's help. And holy shit. Talk about a top tier Luffy moment here, bro. All of a sudden, we see Jinbei shoulder throw a stream of water up over Oars Jr. close to the execution platform, and we get this.
Luffy!
That is fucking cinema. Luffy gets launched into the air holding a massive wooden log right in front of all three of the admirals as he's done messing around trying to get any closer. He lands, fists to the floor, and looks up past the admirals straight to Ace. This gave me chills down my whole body. I could not believe what I just witnessed. Luffy is for real the coolest character ever written, and you can't convince me otherwise. Whitebeard and all of the admirals even admit they respect his tenacity for being such a young guy. However, when he uses the log to try and distract the admirals to get past them, it's still clear that despite his bravery and determination, he's still no match for the Navy's best in house as Kizaru kicks him away. Just as Luffy's kicked away, Sengoku issues the orders to finally execute Ace, and just before the guards slice him, out of nowhere, Crocodile steps in to save Ace by flinging the guards backwards. And this was completely unexpected. Crocodile says as much as he wants to kill Whitebeard, he also doesn't want the government to come out of this war victorious. Doflamingo then slices his head, which was kind of jarring for a second until you realize he's made of sand, so it's all good. But I guess that means Doflamingo really can just slice people up. I'm very confused on what his power still is. He tries to get Crocodile to team up with him, and for like the third time this arc, Crocodile wants nothing to do with this freak show. Now with Ace out of harm's way for a bit, Whitebeard makes his next move when he gets on another one of his ships that was hidden underwater to fly out and bring all of the allies, including himself, into the courtyard. And this is where the battle begins to ramp up even more. Every character is now in the plaza as they all begin to have their own battles scattered throughout. Aokiji tries to freeze Whitebeard, but he fails. Mihawk is fighting pirates and Boa is fighting marines. The Kuma soldiers are are blasting, and Luffy gets ganged up on by the Vice Admirals and Kizaru. The chaos was ramping up as Luffy basically had now hit his injury limit, remembering that he really is just on borrowed time since he recovered so fast during his fights with Magellan thanks to Ivankov in Impel Down. Whitebeard admires Luffy's dedication to save Ace, but he tells Eva and crew that this is the end for Luffy and he just needs to stop and rest. Whitebeard then tries to advance, but he ends up fighting with Akainu, which had some cool scenes to it. Then we finally see Garp step into the battle when he stops Marco from getting too close to Ace on the platform. Now this was an interesting moment from Garp that really has me conflicted as well now too. Beforehand he was obviously quite distraught with the whole situation, but here he stepped in unprompted to stop Marco. Why? Sengoku literally says he didn't have to step in. They even show a flashback around here to a moment when Kid Ace asks Garp if him being born was a good thing after he learned how much Roger was hated in the world around him. Garp's response was Ace will figure out if him being born was a good thing as long as he stays alive to find out, which seems very contradictory to what he just did. So to me, I guess this was Garp choosing a side in the heat of the moment and fulfilling his military role, but still, I don't know. Up until now I was pretty pro Garp dealing with being a figurehead in the Navy, but having two stubborn grandsons causing issues, but this specific scene definitely throws me for a loop, mainly because he really didn't have to intervene, but rather he felt pressured to. But I have much more commentary on Garp coming, so we'll just hold off on that. Luffy pleads to get one more final hormone boost from Eva, and after some hesitation, Eva agrees and injects it into him, giving him the final boost he needs to risk everything for Ace. He makes his way through more groups of Marines when he runs into Kobe. Kobe's been watching this war unfold and seeing just how determined Luffy is. Just like in episode 1, he gets inspired to join the battle and try to stop Luffy. Unfortunately for Kobe, this doesn't work out too well. It's gonna be some time before Kobe becomes a real match for Luffy and the two of them have a real battle, but I'm really hoping that day eventually does come in the series because I do really like Kobe a lot and would love to finally see him gain enough strength to go one-on-one with the Straw Hats. With Garp now seated overlooking the battle, Whitebeard and his crew start taking a beating as the war begins to shift in the favor of the Navy. Whitebeard pulls an absolute Chad move and blasts thousands of Marines into the air and gives a great speech about how he refuses to die before knowing he's secured a bright future for his sons. But even after all his power, the damage he took from Akainu starts to catch up to him. Marco gets pierced by Kizaru, Jozu, the GOAT, gets beaten by Aokiji, and even Jinbei gets chained up by a squad of Marines. Things were just starting to look very bleak. Ace, sitting up on the execution platform watching all of his favorite people get taken down in battle, suddenly starts smiling through his tears. At first this confused me, but it quickly became one of the most heartbreaking yet wholesome moments for Ace. Despite growing up hated because of his heritage, and despite always trying to put up a strong front, finally seeing so many people willing to risk their lives for him completely breaks Ace down as he tearfully admits how happy this moment is making him and that he wants to live. And this scene gave me such similar feelings to when Robin says about the same thing during Annie's lobby. Both of them were forced to go through hardships growing up because of circumstances completely outside of their control. And after spending so long feeling hated by the world around them, seeing just how far the people you love will go for you finally breaks their walls down and shows them the real purpose to living, being surrounded by your favorite people. To me, this kind of dynamic is Oda's bread and butter and one of the things he does best in One Piece. Being able to write emotionally guarded characters filled with so much pain and emotion behind them, only for those walls to finally break because of the actions of people around them. And if we're given more of those moments in the show, then sign me up. With Whitebeard unable to help anymore and the commanders all taken out, Sengoku tells Whitebeard he'll show him truly what the future holds as he signals for the execution guards to finally execute Ace once and for all. Luffy's running towards Ace, trying to push off every Marine in his way, but more and more keep piling on. And just as the swords are about to hit Ace, Luffy gets that determined look in his eye and activates Conqueror's Haki again, this time knocking out almost everyone on the entire battlefield out cold, including the execution guards. This was by far the most insane use of the ability yet. The sheer amount of people Luffy knocks out here and the stakes at hand overall, this was just such a peak moment. And I love the scene afterwards where it shows thousands of knocked out Marines on the floor with just pure silence as Luffy just continues running towards Ace like he didn't just do the most insane thing. And just like what happened on Amazon Lily, Luffy is quite unaware of the power he holds. All of the main characters still standing after this move are shocked by what they just saw, and I think is the moment they truly realize just how much of a threat this relentless kid is going to be going forward once he finally learns what he's capable of. Whitebeard then commands his entire army to back up Luffy no matter what happens, in a moment that I think was Whitebeard realizing Luffy might just be their best chance to save Ace now. Inazuma carves out a ramp up to Ace for Luffy, and as he's running up the ramp, finally being just a couple feet away, Garp jumps in again. And this, again, shocked me. Garp had stopped Marco from interfering earlier, but now Luffy? This was definitely him making his final choice on the matter, which he confirms during this quick conversation with Luffy. Cutting between flashbacks of Garp training Luffy with some some boxing monkeys as a kid, and to present day, where Garp tells Luffy he's made his decision. He's been a Navy fleet admiral for his whole life, and despite all the efforts to stop his boys from becoming pirates, at this moment, they've fully made up their minds and must accept the consequences that come with it. And to be honest, after this specific speech, it made me understand his decision way more than before. Garp had tried many times to get Ace and Luffy to stay away from the pirate life, knowing the dangers and consequences that could come along with it. But at this point, he has to accept that they've made their choice and act accordingly like they were any other criminal. And as hard as this is for Garp, he stands his ground against Luffy, but it's not enough. Luffy enrages, saying he's gonna save Ace no matter what, and one punches his grandpappy off the platform. And this was crazy. The mix of emotions between the two could really be felt here, and part of me kind of thinks Garp actually let Luffy knock him down in order for him to play his role as a military guy, but also at least let Luffy get the chance to save Ace. This would contradict his point earlier about finally making up his mind, but I think when the moment finally came, he couldn't muster up the strength to actually fight back against Luffy. Either way, Luffy gets past Garp, and finally, after such a long journey to reach this moment, Luffy has made it to Ace and saves him. Psych! The hurdles were still not over, as Oda just continued to build the tension in every scene. As Luffy starts unlocking Ace's handcuffs with the key Boa gave him, we finally learn why they call Sengoku the Buddha, as bro just turns into a 50-foot golden Labubu Buddha man towering over them. And even worse, as Luffy's finally using the key, Kizaru manages to hit a trick shot snipe from across the battlefield and snipes the key out of his hand. So now we had to figure out a new way to get Ace out of his handcuffs. However, just then, a completely unexpected twist hits that Mr. 3 disguised himself as one of the execution guards. Mr. 3 had secretly snuck into the control room and tied up the executioner to help Ace, as his way of thanking Bonclay and making his wish come true that Luffy save his brother no matter what. Seeing a former villain in the show come around to do such a selfless act was so cool to see again, and I gotta put Mr. 3 into my GOATs list now for the show after this. Although I'm not gonna lie, Mr. 3, you got a little too close with that sword earlier, bro. Almost forgot the plot there for a second. Mr. 3 wakes up to find a fist from Sengoku coming right down onto him, so he quickly makes a wax key for Ace's handcuffs and a protective shield around them as well, as Luffy goes third gear to tank the punch. And at this moment, Sengoku's punch lands, the execution platform breaks, and loads of cannonballs all explode at the same time. But then, in a gust of fire and smoke, we see something. And this is when my other favorite moment of this entire arc finally arrives. From the smoke screen, we see 4 fireballs appear and then quickly form into the Jolly Roger of the Whitebeard Pirates, and I knew what that meant. Ace had finally been saved. Inside the fire, we see Ace has broken out of his handcuffs and is holding on to Luffy and Mr. 3, finally reuniting the brothers at long last. The smile and excitement on Luffy's face here had me bawling my eyes out so hard. The little laugh he lets out from being so excited to be with his big brother, and then the way he yells his name again, man, I just completely lost it.
Luffy!
Everything he's been through since Sabaody to now has just been hit after hit, but we finally get to see Luffy experience some true happiness as he did the impossible and saved his brother from the government's death penalty. With Ace finally freed, we get a moment that I've been dying to see in the show since we first met Ace in Alabasta, and that's Luffy and Ace fighting together side by side. I've been waiting for this for so long. Ace's abilities are so sick, especially this massive fire strike he does, and the little Firefly mini explosions move was super cool too. The two of them do some combo moves together, and I was still bawling my eyes out just watching the montage of two brothers who are finally getting to be strong pirates together happen. It was everything I truly wanted out of the series, and I'm so devastated that it only lasted for as long as it did. And that's because the show ends here. Woo! Well, Ace is saved and everyone lived happy ever after. Man, One Piece is such a good show. I'm not sure why people say it's over 1,000 episodes when it clearly just ends at episode 481. Alright, here we go. As Luffy and Ace are making their way out of enemy lines, this is when Marineford decides to become the most emotional, heartbreaking piece of media that I've ever witnessed. As I'm sitting here writing the script for the next section, I don't even want to continue. As the two of them escape, Whitebeard realizes that their job had been completed and there was only one way everyone was going to be able to escape this war zone, by sacrificing himself. And man, this was crazy to hear. We had just lost Bonclay and now you're telling me this other great character we've heard so much about is about to be gone too? What the hell? Whitebeard pops his ultimate move and literally shatters the entirety of Marine HQ, bringing the buildings and structures surrounding it down, with his intentions being to sink the entire island as his crew sails away, putting an official end to the old pirate era and ushering the new. Seeing Whitebeard make this choice obviously hits Ace hard after everything he just watched Pops endure to save him, only for it to end with them essentially swapping places in the end. Ace creates a firewall around the two of them as they share one final heart-to-heart, where Whitebeard asks Ace one last question, if he was happy to have him as a father. And after one final flashback to the moment where Whitebeard first extended his hand to Ace 3 years ago, Ace tearfully says of course he was happy to have him as a father as the two part ways for the final time. After this encounter, everyone begins running to the ships to escape, and that's when Admiral Akainu shows up. I genuinely hate everything about his existence and every fiber of his being. Admiral Akainu sees everyone fleeing and literally tries to rage bait Whitebeard's men and allies into trying to fight him as he's slinging around insults about their leader. Mostly everyone's able to know this is just an attempt to get them agitated, so they keep running, except for Ace. Ace hears all the negative things Akainu is saying about Whitebeard and tells him to stop immediately, which is exactly what Akainu wants. Ace, being in the most emotionally vulnerable state he's probably ever been in, having just been saved from execution and watching his father figure make the choice to sacrifice himself, can't help but take the bait to defend Whitebeard's honor, which would end up being the biggest mistake in his life. Akainu starts going on about how much better and more impactful Roger was during his life, how Whitebeard was basically a fraud that only used scare tactics to gain power, and so on. Knowing what Akainu did earlier to bait Squad, and now this, as much as I hate him, he is really good at manipulating people's emotions for strategic reasons. And I fear with how emotionally charged some of the characters are in this show, that this will not be the last time we have this issue with him. Ace hears enough of the insults and goes for an attack on Akainu, but his lava abilities outweigh Ace's basic fire as he gets thrown to the ground. Akainu reinforces that no matter what, he will not let Luffy and Ace, two pirates with the blood of legendary criminals, leave this battle without being killed so they don't cause more problems down the road. Just after he says this, he darts forward, but instead of going for Ace, who's on the floor, he heads straight for Luffy. And in the blink of an eye, just as Akainu's lava fist was about to hit Luffy, God damn it. When I first saw this, I fully thought Ace was gonna be okay. I even tweeted what is happening because people don't die in this show, especially on camera. So when I saw this, my reaction was like, oh damn, that's gonna leave a mark, and then the episode ends. Well, it definitely left a mark on me. In my brain, I now have trauma from an anime. Thank you, Oda. Can someone who was caught up during this moment please tell me what it was like and what the community was saying during the week in between the chapters coming out of Ace getting punched and the next episode being called Ace Dies on the Battlefield? I can't imagine a worse pain than having to wait a week for that. So, as I go to the next episode wondering how Ace is going to recover from this rough hit, I'm met with an absolute roller coaster of emotion and disbelief. Luffy is frozen in place, watching his older brother die in real time as he's just been impaled by a fistful of lava, leaving a giant hole in Ace's chest. And don't even get me started on the donut joke. Everyone around watching is also in complete shock as to what they just witnessed, including Garp and Whitebeard. And we also see that one of Buggy's cult members is broadcasting the entire encounter to Sabaody. Akainu then turns his sights again to Luffy, and just before he can strike him too, Jinbei jumps in front to stop his attack, followed by Marco and Vista. Garp starts walking towards Akainu as well, but is slammed down by Sengoku, literally telling him to keep him pinned or else he's gonna kill Akainu. Yet another tough and conflicting moment for Garp. With all these characters keeping Akainu distracted, we get to Luffy and Ace's final goodbye. Luffy, who's just in complete shock and disbelief, tells Ace he needs to get medical treatment right away, but the doctors, and even Ace himself, tells Luffy it's useless and he doesn't have much time left. And I was already starting to tear up so incredibly hard by this point. Luffy starts shouting that Ace is his big brother who promised he'd never die and that he can't leave Luffy all alone in this world. But Ace takes his time to give Luffy his final words. They flash back to a time Ace told Luffy he'd never die because he can't leave his weak little brother in the world to fight all alone. But now, he's seen Luffy's strength and knows he'll accomplish his dreams of becoming king of the pirates one day. He says that if it weren't for him and a character named Sabo, who we meet during the post-war arc, Ace would have given up on life years ago. All his formative years, he only heard horrible things said about Roger and his son, wishing they had never been born. No matter how hard he fought to separate himself from his bloodline, it would always be part of him in some way. So when Luffy and Sabo were introduced into his life, their bond gave him a reason to live. And that reason to live carried him until he found his next purpose in life for living in the Whitebeard pirate family. And just like Garp said before, as long as you keep living, you'll find out if being born was a good thing. So the life he found on Whitebeard's crew is something he would have never been able to have if it weren't for Luffy. In his final moments, Ace reminisces on all the reasons he found to live throughout the past years of his life, like when Whitebeard offered to join his crew. And then he says that in his life, he never wanted the fame or notoriety of being a powerful pirate. He just wanted to answer the question he had for so many years, if him being born was a good thing. And as we see all the different moments of Luffy, Whitebeard, and all his crew members risking their lives to save him, he realizes that he got the answer to his own question, that somehow a group of people could have so much love for a guy like him. And yeah, I was bawling my eyes out by this point. Ace's character in this moment is just written so well. You can really tell how much all of these characters being part of a war for someone who was outcasted their whole life meant to Ace, and that in some way, he had achieved the real dream he always wanted deep down here. So he tells Luffy to thank them all for loving him, including Dadan, who we meet during post-war, and just then, he dies in Luffy's arms with a soft smile on his face. And Luffy, crying the hardest we've ever seen in the show, becomes paralyzed in shock. At this point in my watch, I was crying so hard I literally had to go take a break. I got up from my seat, paced around my apartment a bit, and went to go get ice cream to make myself feel better. Like, I don't think I've had to use ice cream as a mood enhancer since I got rejected to homecoming in 6th grade, bro. This show was unlocking emotions in me that I didn't even know I still had. And the worst part was, I knew when Luffy finally recovered from his shock that I was only gonna feel worse. With Luffy's life in danger from all the shock and damage he's taken since Impel Down stacking up, the rest of this war becomes an escape mission. All of Whitebeard's crew and the allied pirates are devastated over the loss of Ace, but they know they must help Luffy survive now. Jinbei takes Luffy and starts running while Marco protects them from Akainu, and then even Whitebeard shows up behind Akainu, and it was time for Whitebeard to begin the final act. In a fit of rage, he finally gives Akainu what he deserves, and he slams his ass into the ground and causes a tremor inside of his body as the entire battlefield's flooring begins to rumble. Akainu, however, was able to still get a couple hits on Whitebeard here, burning half of his mustache off and leaving him now with a second donut, hole in his chest. We see now that Whitebeard has literally divided himself off from the rest of his members, allowing them to escape as he makes his final stand. But just then, the chaos somehow again becomes even more insane as now Blackbeard arrives with an upgraded crew. And this was the first time Whitebeard had seen Blackbeard after the day he killed Thatch and ran away. Blackbeard was the final missing warlord during this entire war, and now we know why. Along with his usual 3 crewmates, we now see a plethora of other wacky looking characters alongside him, who we eventually learn are all level 6 Impel Down prisoners, including Shiryu, the former Impel Down warden who's a friggin' psychopath. And honestly, judging from the looks of all these people, Blackbeard's crew is literally just gonna be a bunch of psychos doing whatever they want to anyone without consequence. We get a few answers to our questions here, like one I mentioned earlier on who opened the gates of justice for Luffy to reach Marineford in the first place. Turns out Blackbeard's crewmate Lafitte hypnotized the Marines in the control room to open the gates for any Navy ships that sail by, which means Blackbeard's plan just accidentally helped Luffy as well. We also learn Blackbeard officially resigns from his warlord position and that he only used it to enter Impel Down without hassle so he could form this crew of deviants. So if you watched my theory video at the end of Post Ennie's Lobby, I guess I was wrong. I initially thought that Blackbeard would team up with the government as a warlord to help take down Whitebeard in a massive war of light versus dark. And while a few of those aspects had some ground to stand on, my main point of Blackbeard being helpful to the government was just not true. Bro did not give a single fuck about them, he just used them to his advantage. However, I did actually say that Blackbeard would use his warlord position to basically have free reign and do whatever he wanted, which ended up being true. I just didn't think he'd use that free reign to betray the government as well. Seeing how calculated and tactical the military was during this war, it's kinda crazy to think how completely outsmarted they just got by Blackbeard. After Blackbeard finishes his yapping, Whitebeard has had enough. Whitebeard tells him that he's the only person he'll ever refuse to call son again after he broke the iron rule on his ship and the two face off. Blackbeard shows off that devil fruit powers don't work on him, and then Whitebeard smacks him with his polearm. Whitebeard smacks him around a bit as I was cheering at my desk watching this. He even enrages in one of the scariest looking character designs we've seen in the show yet. Holy. But eventually, Blackbeard, being the dishonorable man that he is, breaks up the 1v1 by sending in his whole crew to attack Whitebeard at the same time to finally finish him once and for all. The animation here, watching as this legendary Emperor of the Sea gets blasted over and over with intense music playing, was so crazy. And as Whitebeard is barely hanging on by a thread, it reveals a last bit of lore for him. We see a time where a young Edward Newgate is on a pirate ship wishing for one thing, the same thing Ace wanted, a family. He didn't care for the fame and fortune that came with pirating. He wanted to sail the seas freely with a group of people that he was close enough to call family. And we also see another scene where Roger and Whitebeard are having a conversation from many years ago discussing the will of D. And I was like, finally, we're gonna know what the D in everyone's name means. Nope, I got baited again. Roger tells Whitebeard that the world started calling him Gold Roger instead of Gold D Roger, and Whitebeard wants to know what the D stands for, but I guess we're just not cool enough to know yet. This got me so heated, bro. After all the pain Oda just put us through, he could have at least given us that. And with his final moments, Whitebeard delivers one last incredible speech. He tells Blackbeard that he won't be the man Roger's waiting for, and implies that someone, perhaps Luffy, will carry the legacy of Roger and Ace to the finish line, and once they finally find the treasure, will ignite the greatest war the world has ever seen. Even after everything the government did to make this war look like a victory for them, Whitebeard completely flips the narrative in front of the whole world thanks to Buggy's crew still broadcasting everything, which was another reason I just loved how Buggy's silly side story actually played such a big role. He confirms that the One Piece is real, reigniting the dreams of pirates everywhere, and essentially kicks off a brand new era right before his death.
ワンピースは実在する
It was such a perfect final moment for his character too. Even while standing there mortally wounded, Whitebeard dies as one of the most feared and respected men in the entire world, making sure his final words leave an impact that the government can never take back. It's very clear his impact has left a mark on so many characters we've met, and in the same way we know Roger to be almost like a folktale legend that carries a lot of impact throughout this adventure, Whitebeard also feels like that now too, except we actually got to witness his strength firsthand. Being able to witness the true power of Edward Newgate in this arc, after hearing the legends of him be known as the strongest man alive, was a treat, and it gave us a great send-off for this iconic character. With his last words, he says one final thank you to his sons for becoming his family, the one thing he always wanted during his life on the seas, as he then wishes them all farewell. And then he dies standing up, which, as sad as it is, that is tough as hell. Gotta be the coolest way to go out. A narration begins to play as it recaps just how much damage Whitebeard was able to tank during this war, such as 267 sword wounds and 152 bullets, but one thing remained consistent in this war and even during his entire life as a pirate, that Edward Whitebeard Newgate never received a single scar on his back from running away. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the hardest way a character could ever go out. So, with Ace dead and now Whitebeard as well, the biggest horrors of this arc had finally come to an end. Before I get into the last few major things that occur here, I want to quickly give the one small other criticism I had with this arc, and that revolves around Ace and Whitebeard dying here. To me, as amazing as both of these characters are, and how incredibly well written they were in this arc and their send-offs were, there's part of me that can't stop wishing we just got to see more of them before this all happened. More so Ace than Whitebeard, but it applies a bit to both. Ace was such an amazing character with one of the coolest designed Devil Fruit abilities that I feel like we just didn't get to see enough of. Maybe that's just me dying to see more Ace and all the cool ways he could counter some big enemies with his sick fire moves, but the little screen time he had leading up to this arc makes me a bit sad. Like even one mini arc in between Alabasta and Marineford, or hell, even Ace appearing to help Luffy sometime in between there for something, I feel like we would have just connected us a tiny bit more to Ace before this incredibly emotional send-off for him. As for Whitebeard, I slightly feel the same just because I would have liked to see him in action a bit more before this arc as well, but to be honest, I think the mystery behind how much power he holds is what makes Marineford so entertaining to watch unfold. So I don't think we needed to see those parts of Whitebeard too much, but I would have loved to get to know him a little more before this arc as well, at least in the way he interacts with his crew. This arc did a really good job at showing us how his crew feels about him and how much love he has in his heart for his sons, but I feel like maybe it would have hit just a little harder if we had seen a couple more instances of that before today. With all this said though, in fairness, I can kind of counter myself on this criticism pretty easily too. I think not knowing much about Ace and Whitebeard leading up to this war keeps you on the edge of your seat from the entire time we learn Ace isn't impelled down to the moment he's finally freed. We don't know the full potential of either of these characters entering into the war, so we have no idea what to expect, which is really exciting. As well, One Piece at this point is infamous for never having characters die off, so to have these two characters who we still haven't seen much of end up dying before we get to see more felt so insanely unexpected, which I think is why Marineford hits so hard. So don't get me wrong, this arc is incredibly amazing, and I think all the decisions made by Oda make complete sense and were executed great. It just seems like he prioritized the entertainment and shock factor of this arc being its biggest hitting points. No matter how you spin it, Ace dying is gonna have you in tears regardless of how much we've seen him beforehand, simply because we know how much he means to Luffy by this point in the story. And I'll get to that point in my next video, but I think putting Ace's death before the post-war backstory gives it an extremely important undertone that shapes how Oda wants you to view this part of the story. So this criticism is really just me conveying what parts of the story I would have loved to see more of, simply because of Oda's ability to write such interesting characters, and this abrupt send-off of them hurt me deeply to my core. Thus, with all of that said, I will greatly miss these two characters, and I have so many questions as to what will happen to the rest of Whitebeard's crew going forward. With Whitebeard dead, we finally get to the final stretch of the arc. News starts spreading like wildfire that the infamous and powerful pirate captain Whitebeard has died, along with what he said in his final One Piece speech. Folks around the world are cheering that Whitebeard is dead and the Great Summit war is over, thinking that this means the era of pirates has finally come to an end. However, they couldn't be any more wrong. Blackbeard, the complete opposite kind of man as Whitebeard, begins his next party trick as he goes under a cloak with Whitebeard's body and then emerges being able to use his devil fruit powers. What? This was insane too. You're telling me that this cherry pie loving guy can not only cancel devil fruit powers, but now he's able to take other people's powers too, being the first person to ever have 2 powers at once? I think it became pretty clear here that Blackbeard is surely to become the main villain of this show, because that is by far the most overpowered thing we've seen in this entire show so far. And on top of that, when does it end? Can he consume 3 devil fruits? 10? 100? Where is the ceiling? Regardless, now Blackbeard harnesses the power of the man the entire world was afraid of just after he died, essentially making all the fears that they thought about Whitebeard actually coming true get even worse because now it's in the hands of a degenerate. He even confirms this by telling the broadcast to Sabaody that a new era of pirates run by him has officially begun. Sengoku, who's heard enough about this Blackbeard rant, slams him into the ground and gives a speech about how no matter what happens to Marine HQ, the people of the world will always need a group that stands for justice like the government. Jinbei, who's carrying Luffy to safety, thinks back to a conversation between him and Ace in Impel Down where he says he wouldn't try to protect someone he didn't highly respect. So seeing just how far Jinbei has gone to help Luffy over these past 2 arcs, it's clear he's already gained a ton of respect for him. Jinbei tries to escape with Luffy, but then he also gets pummeled through the chest by Akainu, striking Luffy as well. I didn't realize it at the time, but this seems to be the actual moment where Luffy gets that big X scar across his chest that I've seen so much in the promotional assets of the show. As Luffy and Jinbei are stricken, Luffy's straw hat falls onto the ice below next to them. Akainu moves in for one final blow, and then out of nowhere again, Crocodile just saves the day, giving me just another reminder why he's my absolute favorite villain as he slices Akainu in half. He sends Luffy and Jinbei into a sandstorm to be transported to an escape ship and tells them he helped because he doesn't want the government to get any more wins today, like he said before. The amount of times Crocodile ended up coming in to save Luffy during this war was honestly kind of insane considering their past and how reluctant he was to help at all with anything that wasn't his goal to kill Whitebeard. Whitebeard's commanders all jump in to help stall off Akainu as well, fully placing their loyalties in Luffy after seeing how much respect Ace and Whitebeard had gained for him. Captain Buggy, being the sweet, caring, humble king he is, catches Jinbei and Luffy out of the goodness of his heart and totally not unintentional as he carries them to find a ship nearby, and that's when another plot twist happens. Out of the deep blue sea, completely unexpected, a submarine emerges owned by none other than Law. This was a random but hype twist, and I absolutely love the music choice during this scene. We still don't know much about Law, but what we do know is he's a doctor and he's willing to help Luffy, at least in the moment. Law was shown on Sabaody earlier watching the war unfold, and my guess is he wanted to come aid Luffy if he could. What reasoning he'd have for that, I have no idea. Buggy hands them over to Law, and with Luffy finally in safe hands, we cut back to the battlefield where the Navy is attempting one final stand against Blackbeard's crew while also trying to push out Whitebeard's allies. Blackbeard is making the entire area quake with his new abilities, cannon fire and bullets are raining all around, and the entire war has somehow descended into complete madness even after everything we've already witnessed. That's when we see Kobe, who's beginning to have a complete meltdown on the battlefield. He's crying, saying he can hear the voices of the people he's been witnessing in pain all day fight a war filled with corruption and death. He's upset with how the government is handling this war and how dishonorable many of their actions were today, like watching Akainu murder an innocent man for no reason. The objective of this war was to kill Ace and potentially even Whitebeard, to which the government somehow was able to do both. However, each side of the battle is still senselessly killing each other. And as the tension of Kobe ramps up, Akainu is giving a speech about never giving any pirate mercy for what they do. Kizaru is about to laser Law's submarine with Luffy and Jinbei on it, and that's when Kobe lets out a loud shout to end this war, making everyone on the battlefield pause and look over. At the time, I was wondering if this was hockey, as it very much seemed so, but nobody had passed out from it. Kobe puts his hands up and stands in front of Akainu, pleading that he puts a stop to this war, sharing that all these Marines have families to go back to, the government has fulfilled their purpose already in this conflict, and that anything extra is merciless. And with this great speech, Kobe explains beautifully how we're all feeling watching this war still play out solely for the purpose of a blood-hungry admiral to kill more. Of course, Akainu doesn't like a pipsqueak like Kobe interfering with his day of killing, so he puts his lava hand up, fully ready to kill Kobe in front of everyone, and just as his fist comes down on Kobe, I know I've said it 100 times this arc, but this one takes the cake. Out of fucking nowhere comes the absolute GOAT, red-haired Shanks.
よくやった。若い海兵。
Dude, this was the most absolute unexpected plot twist of all time. I don't think there was a single second leading up to this that could have hinted that Shanks would arrive at Marineford and step in to help. And not only that, Shanks had just protected Kobe from being smacked on the head for speaking his truth to a corrupt villain, just like how we saw Luffy do for Kobe in episode 1 of the show. It's peak, y'all. This show is so peak. Kobe passes out, but Shanks tells him that what he just did was amazing and that his brief moment of courage would change the trajectory of the entire world, and I assume he means because it bought enough time for Luffy to fully escape. Then, even more peak happens as Shanks notices something on the ground and goes to pick it up, his straw hat. Man, how many times can one person say peak in such a short amount of time? Seeing Shanks pick up his straw hat again after everything we've just been through and all the adventures Luffy has had with it so far got me pretty emotional. Luffy's entire journey so far has been inspired by Shanks and this straw hat, and knowing the condition he's in right now just had me feeling so emotional. I was really hoping we get a Luffy and Shanks interaction here because I'm dying to see it happen, but I understand their promise together is that Luffy will return the hat one day when he becomes a great pirate, but I am wondering if Luffy will even know that Shanks held his hat in this moment. Garp sees Shanks, which is another really interesting encounter, considering Shanks is the person who basically inspired Luffy to be a pirate. Lastly, Shanks and Buggy reunite after many years, and Buggy still can't stand Shanks at all. This encounter was so funny. I loved Buggy's fourth wall breaking moment, or when he does his Shanks impression.
久しぶりだな。久しぶりだな。
God, I love Buggy. Buggy gives the straw hat to Law as him and the crew set sail underwater. Aokiji and Kizaru try to stop their submarine from getting away, but fail, managing to slip away, taking care of Luffy in the meantime. There's also one Navy warship following them, which turns out to be Boa, who's making it a point to follow an injured Luffy wherever he's taken. Back at the battlefield, Shanks walks up to everyone and says that continuing this war is pointless, so if anyone wants to keep fighting, they can fight him and his crew, to which no one's down for. Shanks basically rolled up and aura farmed the shit out of everyone so hard that he ended a war, and that's my goat. Even Blackbeard agrees it's too early to try and fight Shanks as he departs as well. And with the final words of the Summit War, Shanks requests that he can take the bodies of Ace and Whitebeard to give a proper burial, instead of the government propping them up as victory tokens, since the entire world already knows they're dead via the broadcasts. While some vice admirals scoff at this request, Sengoku agrees to let them have this one, even taking the blame for himself. Sengoku, a relic of the previous era like Whitebeard and Garp, has seen the devastation that occurred today all around him and decides to finally put an end to this senseless generational fighting and just let Shanks have this request to peacefully end things off. And with that, he signals the end to the Great Summit War as officially over. Whew! Jesus Christ, man. I feel like I just went through war going back over everything that happened again. But what can I say? This arc was truly a masterpiece. The culmination of hundreds of episodes of characters, storylines, mysteries, and tension all being laid out in front of us in one of the most brutally emotional fashions. This arc achieves the goal of taking a world that's been crafted to feel so connected and giving us the major payoff of watching it all finally crumble together. Additionally, this arc continues to place the building blocks for an entirely new era of the world to begin. And with Oda's incredible ability to weave both encapsulating plots together with incredible world building, I can't even begin to imagine where the story could be headed. And finally, this arc pushes Luffy's future adventure forward in ways I could have never guessed in a million years. Luffy has been through hell and back over the past few arcs, and not knowing what his future holds after this loss of his brother truly has me itching to watch more of the show every day. So, with all of that said, I appreciate you all watching my review of this fantastic arc, and if you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe as it helps the video out a ton. I'm gonna try to get my post-war review out by next week, which will include both a review of the story along with some extra input into things I'm questioning and theorizing heading into the time skip. If you don't know, I live tweet my One Piece journey over on my Twitter account, which is on the screen right now, or it's in the description below. By the time this video's out, I will have already begun watching the next few arcs after the time skip, so if you want to see those reactions live before I make the videos, be sure to head over there. Appreciate you all so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!